Okay, so this is Unit 2, Cells and Biochemistry, and this is our first lesson. So what are we going to talk about in this unit? Well, we're going to talk about the shape or structure that defines the job or function and the interactions between the parts of an organism. So we're going to talk about structure and function, which really correlates to the shape and job of different parts of an organism. We're going to talk about organelles, which are the parts of a cell, and life processes and how they are interrelated in order to maintain a dynamic equilibrium, which is also referred to as homeostasis, or a steady internal state. And we're also going to talk about molecules and how they are in constant motion, and they're naturally spreading out until they are all equal amounts. And this happens both in the environment surrounding us and across a cell membrane in the tiniest portion of our cells. So there's a lot of vocabulary in this unit, a lot of vocabulary, and we're going to break this up into 3 different vocab tests. So the first set, which is going to be 1 through 11, there'll be a quiz on Friday, October 3rd. And then the second set, which are going to be words 12 through 22, we'll have a quiz on October 10th. And then the last set, 23 to 31, we'll have a quiz on October 16th. So these are 2 Fridays. So this is Friday, October 3rd. This is also a Friday. And then October 16th is actually a Thursday. All of these will be on links in Schoology and will take you to Quizlet. So characteristics that all living organisms share that distinguish them from non-living organisms. So when we talk about the word living, we're talking about the word biotic, bio meaning life, and we're talking about non-living, we're talking about abiotic. So biotic are trees, plants, flowers, animals, humans, fish, anything living. Non-living refers to things like water, rocks, soil. So I want you to look at this list of characteristics, and I want you to pick out which 4 characteristics are common to all living things, all living organisms. So you and I, animals. So what 4 do you think are common to all living things? Well, hopefully you said that they are made up of cells, because they are. They consume other organisms. Not all living things consume other organisms. They can produce their own food through photosynthesis. Well, that's not true, because I certainly am not a plant and can't produce my own food through photosynthesis. They have a metabolism. Well, that's true. All living things have a metabolism. They can move from one place to another. Well, not everything can move from one place to another. Plants can't usually move from one place to another. Trees can't. They maintain internal homeostasis. So remember, homeostasis remains a steady state. Well, that's true. Just think what happens when you go outside and you're cold. You shiver automatically to keep warm. That's part of homeostasis. And living things reproduce. There's different ways that they reproduce, and we'll talk about that, sexual and asexual reproduction. And they breathe air from the atmosphere. Well, that's not true, because some things live underneath in the water or in the soil, and they don't necessarily may breathe air from the atmosphere. So these are the 4 things that are common to all living things. Let's talk about the 4 characteristics of life. So we're going to start with cells. Cells are a collection of living matter. Separated from its surroundings. And cells contain organelles. And we're going to spend a lot of time learning the parts of cells and those organelles within them. To complete their life processes. And there are 2 operational ideas about cell theory. One is cells are the basic unit of structure and function of life, which is true. They are the basic unit of structure and function of life. And cells come from prior cells. And that is also true. So let's talk about what these life processes are now. Let's talk about these life processes. So the first one is metabolism. And this is the speed at which an organism completes all of its life processes. The next one is homeostasis. This is a balanced or stable internal environment. So you will learn as we go through this unit that things like when we eat something and we digest it, our blood sugar rises. So in order to compensate that, we produce insulin, which then lowers our blood sugar by converting the sugar to stored energy. And then when our blood sugar is low, we can then get that stored energy and use it. So maintaining a stable internal environment. When we're hot, what do? We sweat. And the sweat then cools our body down. When we're cold, we shiver. These are all ways of maintaining homeostasis. So I'm going to just put some examples. Shiver when cold. Sweat when hot. And then we'll talk about some others in more detail later. Reproduction is the creation of new cells. and or more organisms of the same kind. Okay, so the 8 life processes of all living or biotic organisms. To be alive, an organism must do the following 8 life processes at the cellular and full organism level. 3 life processes move materials into, through, or out of a cell or organism. So we're going to go and talk about each one of these now in a little bit more detail. So one of the most important life processes is nutrition. And we do that all the time. So we have something called ingestion. So A, I'm going to put A, taking materials from the environment. That is ingestion. And making them usable. And we do that by breaking them down into a simpler form. Or eliminating them. Which is ingestion. Okay, so nutrition, taking materials in from the environment, which is ingestion, making them usable by breaking them down into a simpler form, which is digestion, or eliminating them, which is ingestion. And then we have transport, movement of materials in and out of cells, and throughout an organism. Remember, anytime that I'm speaking too fast and you need to catch up writing, you can just pause me. Excretion is the removal of chemical wastes. And we're doing this all the time. And when we talk about excretion, we're talking about waste from body cells. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can do this through urine. We can do it through sweat. And we can do it through exhaling, which is breathing out. So an example that I have here is an amoeba. An amoeba is a single-celled organism, and you can see all of the organelles that it contains are enclosed by the cell membrane. So here you have food being engulfed by what's called a pseudopod, and then once the food is brought in, it goes into this food vacuole and it digests the food, so it then can be used by the amoeba. So this whole process right here that's going on is nutrition. Okay, let's continue. We just have a little bit more. I'm going to finish up the 8 processes. So the next one is respiration, and that is the combining of glucose and oxygen to produce ATP. And ATP is energy. And there is a reaction, a chemical reaction. It's C6H12O6 plus 6O2, which is your oxygen, yields 6CO2, carbon dioxide, and 6 water, and ATP, which is energy. So I'm going to write the words below it. So this is the glucose, which I just told you about, plus oxygen, yields carbon dioxide, plus water. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in another unit. Synthesis means to build or to make. Complex molecules. From simpler ones. And an example of this is photosynthesis. And what does it do? Makes glucose from CO2 and water. So H2O. So we make C6H12O6, which is glucose, a very big complex molecule from carbon dioxide and water. Growth and development is exactly what it sounds like, increasing in size. So you're growing larger, or the organism is growing larger. And development could be changing in shape or function. I'll put and or function. And lastly, reproduction, creating more. Of your own kind. Okay. So which picture represents each life function? Well, this one's pretty easy. We see plants getting bigger, so you should recognize this as growth. and development. What else do we have that you can pick out? Here's the glucose, oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Oh, we talked about that. What was the first one? That was respiration. Here we're taking something small and making something bigger. Some type of reaction. So I would think this would be making. This is synthesis. And here, you'll recognize this a little bit later, but this is something reproducing. So this is reproduction. So we've gone through the first 7. We've got one left, and that is regulation. And that is controlling and coordinating. To keep homeostasis. And that's that stable internal conditions. Okay, that's it for today's lesson. See you in class.